I want you to relax now and let your breathing find the steady rhythm of the evening. Imagine yourself on the gentle slope of a broad, grassy hill, where the world below curves away into a sistering vale. The air is mild and clear, carrying the faint, steady sigh of the earth and the hush of leaves. Far below, a river weaves silver through the landscape, catching the last pale light like a thread of moon. In that valley, there is a small and tender scene, one that will unfold now like a slow, comforting tide. From where you sit, the hillside's concave shape carries a plaintive echo, an echo that came to life when a soft, sad voice rose up from the hollow. For a while, you simply listen, letting the sound fill you. A young woman's sorrow, a tapestry of emotion braided with memory, regret, and a kind of gentle exhaustion. She is seated beside the river's edge, where the bank dips and the grass leans in to offer its own soft company. She is a picture of both disturbance and fragility, with her fingers busy and restless, tearing small scraps of paper and breaking rings, as if sending pieces of her world to rest beneath the water. On her head sits a woven hat, its simple straw plate forming a little shelter that shades her face. It is not a hat of fashion or pride, but one of quiet, humble keeping. The shadows it casts make parts of her features soft and indistinct, as if the very light of the day is mercifully kind. The hat's rim brushes the air gently each time she moves, raising a small whisper of straw and sunlight. Her hair is gathered, neither tightly bound nor flowing free, but arranged with a carelessness that suggests the odd mixture of restraint and fatigue. Some threads slip loose and fall, framing a face that bears traces of time and suffering. There are still glimpses of youth, small, stubborn, bright places that refuse to be wholly eclipsed by sorrow, peeking through like the first green shoots that push through late frost. Her cheeks hold the pale hush of someone who has been crying. Her eyes, when they settle, are glassy and wide, but never fixed entirely on one spot. They wander and return, now gliding across the river's surface, now rising toward the soft horizon where the sky holds the evening. She lifts a thin napkin again and again to her eyes, and on that cloth are marks, letters, and lines faint and blurred, evidence braided into fabric of the tears she has let fall. Each touch of the napkin is an act of memory. She reads aloud sometimes, though her voice catches like the breath of the river where it ducks behind a bend. Words seem to burn through her chest as she encounters them. Promises, petitions, declarations of longing. She will press a letter to her lips as if it were a kind of offering. Then, with that same hand, she will rip it, sending the pieces to the water, as though by dissolving paper she might dissolve pain. Near her, on the grass, lie tokens, strands of hair woven about with small bits of metal, beads, and sentimental trinkets. Once they were treasures, now they are sacrificial things. She lifts them up one by one, as a person might lift frail birds into the air and let them fly. Some she tosses into the river, Others she holds against her chest for a moment longer before surrendering them to the current that accepts every small thing with an easy, patient hush. As each keepsake slides from her fingers, the water accepts it as though it has been waiting. Ripples gather and move out in slow, perfect circles, and the river carries the relics toward the reeds, toward a hush that is both ending and beginning. From a little way off comes the sound of footsteps that are steady and measured, as slow as the pace of an old shepherd who has grazed his cattle across the fields all his life. He is a man whose face maps quiet years and whose voice has the warmth of experience. He is known in the fields and by village hearths as someone who can hold both counsel and silence. Observing what he sees, he draws closer, curiosity tender in his age. He comes not to intrude, but to offer the kind of attention time gives, an ear that has learned how to listen patiently. He moves with that soft dignity the years bring, setting down his staff against the grass before he sits. He keeps a little distance, respectful and gentle, the kind of distance that says he knows sorrow's private shape and offers company rather than cure. When she notices him and is asked about the reason for her distress, she does not shy from telling him everything. Her voice unspools her story deliberately, with a cadence that lets you follow every turn. She begins not with blame, but with the simple truth that grief has more power over her than the passing of years. She speaks of youth, her own youth, in tones that are not boastful, but clear-eyed. She says that she might have been a full, blooming presence in the world, one who held herself steady and true, had she kept her affections to herself alone. But the world had other plans. She tells of a young man who came into her life like a bright and dangerous season. He was a figure of rare outward charm. His hair hung in gentle curls, catching the light and stirring at the soft persuasion of the wind. He moved with a kind of effortless grace. Even the way wind touched him seemed to know how to flatter his appearance. There was an allure about him, a small symphony of gestures, smiles, glances, slight inclinings of posture that made people feel as though they had glimpsed some small fragment of paradise rendered in human shape. Every eye that fell upon him found itself reconsidering what it had believed to be beautiful. The world seemed to fit around him easily, as if the world itself wished to adorn him. He had the kind of mouth and voice that could do many things. He could speak to make a crowd laugh or bring them to tears, shifting the room's feeling as if altering a cloak. He loved to argue and to weave reasoning that bent naturally toward whatever served him best. When he cared to charm, he could summon the language of deep feeling with artful ease. When he wanted to deceive, he could shape his words into smooth and winning forms that hid the blade beneath. He seemed to move between states, serious and playful, sincere and feigned so convincingly that none could be sure when the mask was truly a face. People were drawn to him. They made pictures of his likeness, kept mementos, wrote lines and poems to him. Some claimed him in their imaginings and wore his image like a warmth against their hearts. The young woman watched all this from a place of honor. She kept her distance and trusted herself to the guard of cultivated restraint. Yet, as the old truth proves time and again, knowledge and example cannot always keep the heart at bay. Counsel may warn, but desire is persistent and untroubled by abstract caution. The words of others, even those who had been burned by the same hand, were not a wall strong enough to stop her own feet when they approached the threshold of longing. Despite what she had observed, how the young man had wandered into other women's lives and left marks of deceit, despite the stories she heard of his duplicity, she found that his manner and the art of his affection were like fine poison. When he turned his attention to her, he did it with a kind of pleading sincerity that opened small gates within her. He called himself wounded by the same tender wrongs that once might have elevated his charms. He spoke of being misunderstood and of love that was faithful and uniquely offered to her alone. In those moments, his voice softened into an intimacy that made the world shrink to the space between them. There were gifts, two trifles that the world around them had once considered sacred. Tokens, floral phrases in verse, strands of hair braided and set with delicate stones. He showed her attentions that, in quieter moments, acted like a tender siege upon her defenses. She describes the way his eyes seemed to water on command, an artful sadness that could make her own eyes leak in sympathy, as if by matching weeping he could both guilt and draw her in. His tears, like a trick of light, persuaded her she was needed and chosen. As she tells it, he could change his features with the subtlety of a stage actor. He would blush with apparent shame at something he had said, or pale as though struck by grief. He could straighten his posture and preach cold chastity one minute, and show burning desire the next. This mutable display made it impossible for the unpracticed heart not to mistake performance for truth. She admits, quietly, and with a softness that invites compassion rather than judgment, that she fell. She says it with a kind of wonder at herself and a gentle horror. How was it possible that she, who had eyes to see and reason to judge, could be undone? Yet she was, in ways that the river seems to know and accept. The young man, she tells the listener, had a plenitude of cunning, applied with a craft that borrowed grief and borrowed joy as tools. He could seem to love chastity and maintain it with words while his actions betrayed an opposite appetite. He had the skill to present himself as both cherub and tempter, and his cleverness lay in this very disguise. Those who had never known his guile were dazzled. Those who should have withheld their affections found there, while softened by his flattering ministrations. In the end, she did not blame only the young man. She also looks inward to the appetite that made her approach what had been warned as peril. There are details she speaks of that reach out like small, precise jewels, images of gifts carried and exchanged. The way light played on certain stones, or how a tear traced a line down the cheek and gathered the color of a rose in its wake. She tells of receiving letters folded in silk and sealed with care, of how carefully these papers were read. And then, in a surge of betrayal or sorrow, torn and surrendered to the water, there is the bitterly lyrical moment when she calls the lines registers of lies, these ink-blotted confessions that, for all their flourish, tracked unfaithfulness like a ledger. Among the many women who loved him, the narrator says, not one did he love truly. He was practiced in the art of seeming to be all things at once, brave, humble, chastened, ardent, and in such practice he enrolled many hearts. He had been the cause of more than a few private griefs, yet he managed to present himself as the wounded party, the victim of circumstance. He showed generosity that was theatrical, cunningly displayed, so that sympathy followed him like a cloud. She tells this in a manner that asks the listener to feel for each person once deceived. Her tone is not spiteful, rather, it is reflective, like one who has walked the length of an old road and can describe the places where the ground gave way. She recounts how he won over a sister cloistered in devotion, a nun who had vowed herself to a religious life, and who, by virtue of careful art and the right moment, found her vows become tender memories. The narrator's wonder at this conquest is tinged with sorrow. Even those who had separated themselves from the world's temptations were not immune to the seeming holiness of his courtship. Throughout this telling the man who listens the shepherd, the elder responds not with anger, but with a compassion he has honed over years. His presence is a steadying light. He hears the woman lay bare the ways she was seduced, not with force, which was rarely his method, but with the capable art of small kinds of flattery and of a mimicry of suffering. Such courtship, she says, is the worst kind, because it deforms virtue into obedience and persuades minds to obey what is merely practiced rhetoric. She shares how, in the soft device of courtly speech, the man could make the weeper laugh and the laugher weep. He had the manner, she says, to catch all passions in his net and to use them as he would. Against him, measures such as caution and precedent looked like feeble fences. The narrator tries to explain how people, even those with eyes open to the truth, sometimes choose the taste of what seems sweet despite the knowledge of its bitter roots. Yet she tells this with no fierce condemnations. There is an odd gentleness in how she speaks of him, less condemnation than an attempt to understand the ways sorrow curls around the human heart. In describing the moments she yielded, how his tears called forth her own, how his counterfeit sorrow unstitched the modesty she had worn like a cloak, she asks the listener to consider the small alchemical acts by which emotion begets emotion, by which mimicry of pain summons real grief. As she speaks, the evening deepens. The river grows darker, and the sounds of the valley fold into a closer, quieter hush. Crickets begin their soft chorus. A single star pricks the sky where the first night appears. The The woman's voice trails into those pauses that feel like inhalations, moments where the past becomes a presence in the present, and where memory itself takes on a kind of gentle weight. She remembers how the young man's gestures and words once seemed persuasive enough to change the very laws of her being. He had a way of sweetening things. His manner made even abstinence sound like a temptation to be denied. There is a final tenderness in her confession. She does not paint herself as ruined beyond repair. Rather, she offers her tokens back her palette of bruised emotions, the jewelry of other people's vows, and places them before the elder as if to set them on a wider altar. Take them, she seems to say, not with bitterness, but with the quiet hope that what she gives might find a proper keeping. It is as though she seeks not only to unburden, but to return to a larger order, to place her frayed pieces into a container that will make some kind of sense of them. Listening to all this, the old man holds his calm. There's no sermon or sudden requital, only the steady courtesy of one who has loved and lost, and who knows the language of consolation. He offers no easy answers, because there are few when the matters of the heart are concerned. Instead, he offers presence, the kind that makes the listener feel their own breathing sync with another's, an act of basic human warmth. The river, as if in accompaniment, moves on. Small creatures sway in the reeds, a heron lifts its wing and moves like a thought across the distance. The tokens sink, disappear, or lie half submerged, as if sleep were covering them with a quieting cloth. The woman, growing weary, lets her hands rest. The labor of telling is itself a kind of closing. One more way the day is folded into night. For a while there is silence that is not empty, but full of the settling of things. The hill holds its shape around them. The sky presses down softly with the comfort of dusk. The elder and the woman sit together, two forms on the bank, companions by circumstance and tenderness. They become suggestions against the wider dark, a shape of understanding, a small assurance that stories have company. As the world softens further, the narrator's voice, soft, patient, and now low, begins to wind down the tale. It steadies into a cadence that moves like the river's current, always moving, never urgent. She explains not only the folly and the pain, but the strange instruction sorrow offers. In losing herself, she learned the contours of her own heart. In handing over tokens, she discovered that to let go is sometimes a truer kind of keeping. There is no final triumph, no thunderous condemnation of the one who wronged her. Instead, there is a gathering of memory, of lessons, of acceptance. And in that gathering, she finds an odd replenish. Night deepens further, and the air cools. The stars come out in small, steady increments. Soon the moon will rise, bathing the valley and river in a wash of silver that smooths the edges of things. The young woman, who once moved like a storm of papers and broken trinkets, now breathes with a calmer rhythm. Her hands lie in her lap. Every so often she glances at the river, where the objects she released float like faint islands of memory and then vanish. There is a quiet dignity in that watching, a patience that tells you she has begun, however slowly, to recover. The elder prepares to leave. He rises with soft motions and offers a hand in a way that does not demand, but invites the woman's trust. She takes it gently and without hurry, and for the first time her face seems to carry a new light, not the bright bloom of naive joy, but the steadier warmth of someone who has gained a hard-won wisdom. They walk up the hill together, two slow silhouettes against the widening night. As they go, the hill cradles their steps, and the valley keeps their story like a small ember, glowing faint but safe. You who have been listening in that soft, attentive place between wakefulness and sleep, feel the echo of the tale settle in you like a warm shawl. Breathe in, breathe out. Each breath smooths the rough edge of day. Imagine the river continuing on, patient and unjudging, taking what we give and turning it into music, the soft plash of memory made gentle. Now let your eyelids become heavier. Picture the grass beneath you, cool and willing. Think of the hat of straw, the folded letters, the river accepting their small offerings. Let the slow cadence of the old man's steps and the woman's quiet voice guide you toward the edge of sleep. There is no need for answers tonight, only the soft knowledge that stories are held and that the world keeps turning. Allow the scene to blur into a comfortable darkness in which you can rest. Feel your muscles unweave their tension, one strand at a time, like paper being slowly and evenly torn into smaller, harmless pieces, released into the current. Know that how we feel and how we heal are parts of the same gentle process. In that knowledge, feel the safety of being human. Let the last image be the river under moonlight, slow, steady, untroubled. Follow it now into sleep and carry with you the gentle lesson that, though people sometimes cause sorrow, tenderness and understanding can be found, too, sometimes even in the same breath. Sleep now, and let the valley keep your dreams tender and your rest deep.